So then it made us hardened people where we couldn't trust anyone.
Yeah.
We thought everybody hated us.
Yeah.
And what I learned was when I settled here 10 years ago, I realised that there was a lot of good people. I thought every single person hated travellers. I didn't think there was anybody that liked the travellers. And when I settled and realised that settled community people was coming in, helping, then I started realising that there was people that did care about human rights and did care that we have human rights. We are human and we just need some little bit of respect.
To be here amongst you, I think there are a lot of politicians in Basildon Council that are not very courageous and have decided that it's easier to play to prejudice and to intolerance than it is to stand up for what is right. And I'm not someone who believes that's right at all.
In Dale Farm, what strikes me is there are highly articulate, very capable people who have an incredible number of problems in their life. Family life is difficult. A lot of the women are on their own with the kids. It's difficult to maintain family life, except in a big extended context. Everybody is an uncle and aunt, or a cousin, or something, and they fall back on the extended family. The nuclear families often don't work. The pressures are very much greater in the culture than they would be outside, I think.
You were all born in Basildon. You are my constituency. It's my duty to meet with you and to represent you, and I wish some of the other elected representatives had the same sense that I try to in my work. But when you see travellers as human beings and families, as you know because you're here and as you kindly introduced me today, is a different story. Like the mother with triplets who were all born in Basildon Hospital.
I want to get in this. Yeah. Say them with the bailiffs, so even, the bailiffs. The police sitting down there,
what do you think they're here for?
to break all our homes.
Have you been evicted before?
No, I haven't been to the one over there.
So where are you going now?
I don't know where we're going, so we had nowhere to go.
You go to school now?
Yeah.
Let's go to school.
There are more than 90 families living here on Dale Farm, with more than 100 children. Children who are currently going to the school in the local Basildon area. If this eviction goes through, those children will no longer be going to school. If this eviction goes through, the sick and the elderly, which includes some very sick, are going to be at legitimate and serious risk of death. Now, how much is this costing to destroy a community, to evict the residents of Dale Farm? It's impossible to know that figure, but it is going to be in the millions and could be up to £22 million. £22 million to destroy a community. Really, I think what people need to consider is, why do governments spend so much for war, so much to bail out bankers, and so much to deny what is inherent human rights? The right to adequate housing, the right to live a dignified life, the right for their children to have a proper education. All of this is going to be denied at the cost of the taxpayer to the tune of millions. Is it possible that the tyrants and their minions in government and mainstream media know that if we ever decide to exercise our human rights, that we will actually be free? I think that that is the case. And I think that's exactly why we must ensure that every people are able to exercise their human rights 100%.
I tried to comply with Basildon Council meeting after meeting. I tried to save them £15 million of taxpayers' money to sell them the land and save an eviction of £18 million, and they wouldn't accept it. So we asked them for £2 million in 2009, they wouldn't accept it, and then they would not give us even an offer. So as time went by, they said they'd rather spend the £18 million plus their legal fees, about another £2 million, which is up against £20 million. They'd rather waste the money on eviction. So it's a crazy situation.
I'm not going to put a feather on the traveller's hat and say, whoa, we're these beautiful people. You will still get your good and your bad, but the reason why there is them few little bad ones is from the treatment that we have from generation to generation.
Yeah.
We've always been treated disrespectful and insulted, called loads of names, barred out of shops, barred out of pubs, barred out of laundrettes. I could go on forever.
I think there is a trauma that goes over many generations and is quite hard to shake off, and people's it creates a solidarity. It enforces isolation from the outside community. There's a sort of loyalty factor involved, but it also makes for disturbance.
We have to look twice at people and we think, can we trust them? Can we not trust them?
Yeah.
Because we've been let down that many times and been mistreated in such bad ways that it comes to a stage where you're thinking, who am I going to trust, who am I not going to trust? And that makes us very frightened as well.
There's a myth that travellers are people who will move on every 2 weeks or every 28 days regardless and just carry on the road relentlessly moving. The reason for that is that there was a law for 200 years. Well, there originally was a law saying that if a gypsy turned up in a parish, she could be hung just for being a gypsy. And that was passed by Henry VIII, and it was on the books for about 200 years, and eventually repealed as being too severe.
Look, we don't understand this. We see the government bailing out the banks for trillions of dollars. We see foreign wars going on, and yet they're trying to blame us for some kind of waste of public money. We don't want any public money. We just want a piece of paper that we would pay for to say we can live on our own land. It doesn't cost anybody anything. Cost us something, cost the public nothing.
It seems to me that in the good old days, racism was much more honest, much more overt. And into the 21st century, racism, alive and well as it is far more subtle, much more dishonest if you ask me. I'd like to talk about my own stupidity and how I gravitated towards prejudices, not quite racist, full-on racism. But I remember when I was a kid, and I grew up, I ended up getting into scraps, you know, maybe more than most kids. I got into scraps. And eventually, when I was going to school, they ended up busing us relatively rich white kids to the poor black neighborhood of San Diego where I lived. And when I went to the poor black neighborhood, I ended up getting into more than one scrap with a black kid. And every time I got into a fight with one, I ended up having a fight with several of these black kids. And what ended up happening to me was, it started to make me really angry towards black people. I thought to myself, why can I not just fight one-on-one? And ultimately, these prejudices moved on and gravitated to the point where ultimately I even flirted with the idea of white supremacist groups. Now, I didn't ever do that, but I can understand how people develop these prejudices, and at the root of it is an ignorance, and the ignorance is based on not understanding the root of why black people, gypsies, or others feel an anger and a resentment towards society and towards others who seem more well off than them, who seem more favored than them, and who are actually a part of the system that persecutes them. And it is this lack of understanding of the root of the problem which makes us collectively stupid enough to where we are able to be pitted against each other. And while those at the top of the pyramid are sitting there laughing at us because we working class people are sitting here pointing the finger at other working class people, they continue their system of tyranny, and largely based on racism. Whether it's overt or whether it's dishonest and subtle, it's racism, plain and simple. And that is at the root of the problem here and the root of all of our problems, because we will continue to be manipulated by this perverse, racist, bigoted system as long as we're stupid enough to buy into the arguments.
For God's sake, don't touch it.
Dad, what's wrong with the telly?
Good evening, London. Allow me first to apologize for
That's the emergency channel.
I do, like many of you, appreciate the comforts of the everyday routine, the security of the familiar, the tranquility of repetition.
Bloody hell.
I enjoy them as much as any bloke. But in the spirit of commemoration,
Who's that, Mum?
whereby those important events of the past, usually associated with someone's death or the end of some awful bloody struggle, are celebrated with a nice holiday, I thought we could mark this November the 5th, a day that is sadly no longer remembered, by taking some time out of our daily lives to sit down and have a little chat. There are, of course, those who do not want us to speak.
Let me think, just let me think.
I suspect even now, orders are being shouted into telephones, and men with guns will soon be on their way.
It's Chancellor Sutler.
Damn it.
Why? Because while the truncheon may be used in lieu of conversation, words will always retain their power. Words offer the means to meaning, and for those who will listen, the enunciation of truth. And the truth is, there is something terribly wrong with this country, isn't there?
You designed it, sir. You wanted it foolproof. You told me every television in London.
Cruelty and injustice, intolerance and oppression. And where once you had the freedom to object, to think and speak as you saw fit, you now have censors and systems of surveillance coercing your conformity and soliciting your submission.
We need cameras.
How did this happen? Who's to blame? Well, certainly there are those who are more responsible than others, and they will be held accountable. But again, truth be told, if you're looking for the guilty, you need only look into a mirror. I know why you did it. I know you were afraid. Who wouldn't be? War, terror, disease. There were a myriad of problems which conspired to corrupt your reason and rob you of your common sense. Fear got the best of you, and in your panic you turned to the now High Chancellor Adam Sutler. He promised you order, he promised you peace, and all he demanded in return was your silent, obedient consent.
Inspector, you're almost through.
Last night, I sought to end that silence. Last night, I destroyed the Old Bailey to remind this country of what it has forgotten. More than 400 years ago, a great citizen wished to embed the 5th of November forever in our memory. His hope was to remind the world that fairness, justice, and freedom are more than words. They are perspectives. So if you've seen nothing, if the crimes of this government remain unknown to you, then I would suggest that you allow the 5th of November to pass unmarked. But if you see what I see, if you feel as I feel, and if you would seek as I seek, then I ask you to stand beside me 1 year from tonight, outside the gates of Parliament, and together we shall give them a 5th of November that shall never, ever be forgotten.